Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on water and wastewater rates in Alabama. My name is Shadi Eskaf, and I'm with the Environmental Finance Center at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. This webinar was sponsored by the Alabama Department of Environmental Management, ADEM. We're grateful to Ms. Sims, Mr. Harrison, Mr. Daly, and others at ADEM for their active support and funding of this project. The webinar is an outgrowth of the 2016 Drinking Water and Wastewater Rate Survey of Alabama Utilities that was conducted by the EFC on behalf of ADEM. We've collected we have rate sheets from Alabama Utilities, and we are now presenting on the results of the survey as well as a dashboard. A little bit of an introduction of myself and the Environmental Finance Center. If you're not familiar with the EFC, we are based in North Carolina. We are based in the University of North Carolina, but we are serving specifically the southeastern region of the United States, but we are also doing some work elsewhere in the country. We are one of several environmental finance centers that are funded by EPA and other sources, including ADEM, to provide assistance to the governments and other organizations that provide environmental programs, including water and wastewater, and help them figure out how to pay for those services and how to provide the services in fair, effective, and financially sustainable ways. So that's our mission. And we do that through some applied research and teaching and outreach. So this webinar is included in that teaching outreach portion or service. And we also do some program design evaluation. We do a lot of direct assistance with local governments as well. So we spend a lot of time working with utilities, water and wastewater utilities, looking at the rates that they're charging, thinking about capital planning. We do a lot of webinars. We do a lot of trainings. We do a lot of workshops. Last year, I believe my colleague Glenn Barnes did a workshop in Alabama. There is one coming up in July as a forum for all of Region 4, EPA Region 4. My name is Shadi Eskaf. I'm the Senior Project Director, and I've been with the EFC since 2004. Again, this project was funded by ADEM, and if you have not yet received any funding from ADEM, I will make a pitch for their SRF programs. They have some low-interest loans that could save you money when you're financing your capital projects. No, they did not ask me to say this. I am just letting you know that that is an option available for water systems because we know that infrastructure is very expensive. And we thank ADEM for sponsoring the survey and this webinar. So before we get started, I'm going to pull up a poll question just to get an idea of who's in the room. Please let me know if you work for a water system that's serving fewer than 10,000 people, and that's people, not number of accounts. If you are a water system that's serving more than 10,000 people, if you're a wastewater system, you can select all that applies. If you have both, and please select both. Consulting firm, technical assistance provider, or if you're from the state, the university, or something else. And we'll just give you just a few more seconds. And this will help me figure out, as we talk about dashboards and rate surveys, water and sewer rates, which ones are you more interested in, and I'll help tailor my presentation. All right, thank you, and I'll launch that. So it looks like about evenly split between water systems and wastewater systems. So we will talk about water and wastewater rates, and most of you all are from utilities, but a quarter are from consulting firms or technical assistance providers. So thank you all for being here. For those of you who are not representing a water system, later on when you see more poll questions about your utility, if you're a consulting firm, just think about one of the water systems that you work with and answer on their behalf, or answer how they might answer that kind of question. So thank you. Okay, so the survey was actually conducted last year, and this is 2016 ADEM Water and Wastewater Rate Survey. What we did last year was and this is the second year that we've worked with ADEM on a water and wastewater rate survey. In 2016, around mid-2016, We called as many utilities as we possibly could in the state of Alabama. We called about 540 utilities. So we try to find every single local government, not-for-profit, or any large systems that serve a large number of customers. And we found the contact information, we emailed, we called, we asked for rate sheets, and we followed up. We try to get as many rate sheets as possible. We didn't have a questionnaire. We just asked the utilities to provide us rate sheets. We got the rate sheets, and from there we added them into our database. The rates that we were asked for, and we have results on, are water rates, wastewater rates, and residential irrigation rates, rates for residential customers, commercial customers, industrial customers, and then for the utilities that have different rates for people who live outside, outside city limits or outside a district limit or something like that, we have the inside and outside rates as well. So we have a lot of rate information. Because we asked for the rate sheets, we could calculate the bills that you charge your customers for any consumption point, any of these types of customers or any consumption point. So we've produced some analyses that show the variations of rates that are being charged in the state of Alabama. In all these rates, we've collected the base charges, which is sometimes it's called the minimum charge, how much you charge for no consumption, in addition to the volumetric rates that are assessed based on how much, what the volume of water is that flows through the meter. We calculate again how much utilities charge customers for different consumption points. Most of the slides that you'll see here are going to be talking about 5,000 gallons a month, which is somewhere near the residential average for the state. We also got some supplemental data, and we matched all that data together. So we got the audited financial statements from local governments, and we looked at the enterprise funds to pull out some information about the revenues and expenses at the utility level. And we've combined that with the rates, because when you're reviewing your rates, usually you want to look at your financial benchmarks as well as your rates and other kinds of metrics like affordability. And for that, we've collected information about socioeconomic data for the census place that your utility serves from the Census Bureau. We also collected some water system characteristic data from CIDWIS using 2016 data. And then one thing that ADEM asked us to do is to compare how much utilities are charging for water and wastewater. How does that compare to an SEC football ticket? Because I actually graduated from an SEC school. I will not tell you which one that is. You can probably guess what that is now. But I went to an SEC school, and I know how important SEC football is, and comparing water and wastewater rates to an SEC football ticket is a good way to give people an idea of how much, what value they're getting out of cheaper rates, basically, for something as essential as water and wastewater. We got 448 utilities participating, serving about 5 million people across the state. You can see from the map it's all over the state. Most of them are municipalities. We have a lot from not-for-profits as well as authorities, 15 county utilities, and 5 others, including for-profits. These 448 utilities represent about 83% of the total number of utilities that we try to get, but they represent also 90% of all the people who are served by community water systems. So it's basically most of the large systems are included, and vast majority of the small systems as well, and we're just missing a few of the small systems. We put all this information on a web page that has the tables of rates. We have the dashboard that I'll be demonstrating in a little bit, and as well as a report that shows the variety of rates and rate structures that are being used in the state of Alabama. Everything's on this web page. Again, you'll have the PowerPoint slides, so you don't have to try to write down this link. Once you have the slides, you'll be able to click on it, or you can just go to ADEM's website and look for their SRF webpage. Really, the easiest way to get to this page is to just do a Google search and type in Alabama water rates. You can throw in ADEM or EFC into that search, and it should come up as the #1 webpage at that point. I just mentioned that we have a report and tables of rates. A lot of the results that you'll see in the slides in the first half of this webinar come from the reports, or they're slightly adapted from the reports. The tables of rates essentially are, I don't remember how many, it's more than 100 pages of utility rates probably closer to 150 or nearly 200. But every single utility that we have, we've got the how much they're charging for different consumption points for residential, commercial, and industrial customers, for water and wastewater, for irrigation, for inside, outside, and as well as the rate structure details. So how many, if they have a block rate structure, how many blocks do they have, what's the size of the first block, and a lot of information that goes into the details of the rate structure. So those tables are available. They're both in PDF format as well as Excel format. So you can download it and just do your own filtering, do your own analysis. All of this was calculated, all of this was done in 2016. So everything that I'll be presenting going forward shows rates that were current as of April 2016. We know that many of you have raised rates since then, but we don't do the survey every year. This webinar is kind of a reminder that this tool is available. There are some ways for you to modify the dashboard to account for an increase that you might have had since the last time we did the survey, and I'll show you how you can do that. So that's the point of this webpage, is just a reminder that these are 2016 rates. Please feel free to use the dashboard, use it for decision making, but if you might need to adjust your rates to bring it up to current rates. So here are some results of the survey. 43% of the rate structures and about 52% of the wastewater rate structures have unique rates for commercial or non-residential customers. So nearly half of the utilities, half of the 448 utilities, half of those charge non-residential customers something that's different than the residential customers. And we're not just talking that the base charge is by meter size. We're saying that the volumetric rates as well are somewhat different than what residential customers are being charged. There's a smaller fraction than this who have unique industrial rates. So there are a lot of utilities that have residential rates and non-residential rates, and there's the smaller portion of that also have an industrial rate structure that's unique compared to the other two. Residential irrigation rates are not very common in the state of Alabama. Only about 3% of the rate structures have unique rates for residential irrigation. I'm guessing for the rest of you, or for most of you, if a customer has a separate meter, a residential customer has a separate meter for irrigation purposes, you probably just charge them the regular water rate, but you don't charge them the sewer rate. In other states, including here in the state of North Carolina, there are a lot of utilities that say if you have water that goes through a separate irrigation meter, we will charge you different rates that go through that meter than for the standard household, the standard meter for the household. And there are a variety of reasons for that, primarily because the water that goes through the irrigation meter is being used for discretionary, watering purposes, outdoor watering purposes. And for a utility that's trying to encourage conservation, charging a little bit higher rates for that accounts for the fact that there's a lot of peaking, a lot of seasonal demand that put a lot of cost on the utility. So you're allocating those seasonal costs to the customers who are using the seasonal demand. We can get into a little bit more of that if you have some questions. Please feel free to put that in the question box, and I'll circle back to it. About 15% of the rate structures have unique rates for outside customers. When looking at municipalities only about a quarter of the municipal systems have outside rates compared to inside. That's actually very different than a lot of states that we look at. In North Carolina and Georgia, we do these surveys annually for those two states as well as for other states. I can tell you here in North Carolina, about 80 to 85% of the municipalities have different rates for outside city limits. I think that's all I'll want to say about that. But if you have questions about it, again, please feel free to ask. So this slide shows you that we have a lot of information, a lot of data about a lot of different kinds of rate structures for different customer classes. I'll focus, because we only have a 1 hour and half of this presentation will be demonstrating a dashboard, I don't have a lot of time to present all of those results. So I'm going to be focusing specifically on residential rates for inside customers. So all these other graphs that you'll see coming up are only for residential inside customers. So how base charges are being priced right now for the state, or were in 2016 for the state of Alabama. Nearly all of the rate structures have a non-zero base charge. So it's very rare for a utility to charge $0 as a base charge, because you have a lot of fixed costs. So I would also advise that you have a non-zero base charge. Water base charges are slightly higher than wastewater charges. The median, which means half of the utilities in the sample, were charging more than $18.38 per month for water, and more than half were charging $15 or more for wastewater. So the water prices seem to be a little bit higher than the wastewater, and that appears to be true for the volumetric rates as well as base charges, and I'll show you a graph of that as well. And here you can see a distribution of what those base charges are. Most of them kind of congregate somewhere between the $11 to $20 or $25 range. How much usage is included with base charge? So a lot of utilities have, they charge, let's say, $20 a month, and that includes the first 1,000 gallons or the first 2,000 gallons. So any consumption within that allowance is considered, it's included with the base charge, so it's not charged any volumetric rates. 93% of the water rate structures for Alabama and 67% of wastewater rate structures have a consumption allowance included with the base charge. Most of them are near or at the 2,000 gallons per month mark. And that is a lot higher than other states that we've looked at. So even large systems and small systems, it seems like in the state of Alabama, consumption allowance is something that's very, very common to do. In other states, we do these surveys. We might see it where the majority of systems don't have a base charge, and those that do have base charges might include more than that level. How the volumetric rates are charged, so beyond the consumption allowance, beyond the base charge, now you're charging rates based on how much water the customer is using. And for what we're seeing, how you actually charge that could be different. You could charge them in terms of blocks. So the more you use, the higher the price, the higher the unit price, or you can charge them the same rate for every 1,000 gallons that they add on. For water, most of the utilities seem to be charging uniform rates, but large systems seem to be favoring increasing blocks, while a lot of small systems still favor decreasing block. Decreasing block means that I might be charging $5 per 1,000 gallons from 0 to 5,000 gallons, and then it will drop that price. Instead of being $5 per 1,000, it will drop down to $2 per 1,000, anything above 5,000. So the more you use, it's sort of like going to a supermarket. The larger quantity that you buy, the bigger the toilet paper roll that you buy, the lower the unit price is. That's a decreasing block rate structure. Increasing blocks goes the other way. The more you use, the higher that unit price is. So it provides an incentive for a customer to try to keep consumption as low as possible so they can avoid those higher rates for the higher blocks. Larger systems, again, seem to be favoring those increasing blocks. On the wastewater side, nearly everybody basically uses uniform rates. You can see the other category seems to be relatively high. About a quarter of the systems have other rate structures. Most of those other rate structures are uniform rates that have a cap. So a wastewater customer, residential customer would pay uniform rates up to a certain amount. So let's say up to 15,000 gallons or up to 20,000 gallons. And then beyond that, there are no more volumetric wastewater rates. So the price drops to $0 at that point. For those that have block rate structures, whether it's increasing block or decreasing or some other variation of block rate structures, it looks like half of the water block rate structures and about half of the water rate structures have block rates, and 18% of the wastewater rate structures have blocks. Most of the blocks seem to end, the first block seems to end between 4,000 and 6,000 gallons a month, which is close to, again, what the average consumption is. So it seems like the first block is there to charge customers up to an average consumption level, whether a low rate or a high rate. And then anything above that average consumption level, the price either increases or decreasing depending on the type of block that you use. The prices that are being charged for water at 5,000 gallons, and again, the prices, because of block rates, prices change, but let's say we'll focus only at the 5,000 gallon point. At 5,000 gallons per month, half the water rate structures are charging $4.75 per 1,000 gallons or more, and half of the wastewater rate structures are charging $3.25 per 1,000 gallons or more. So you can see here, even in the volumetric rates, water rates are higher than the wastewater rates in Alabama. So what does this all mean from the customer's point of view? How much how much is a residential customer paying? How much are they being charged based on how much water they're using? So these are graphs that show for different consumption levels, what's the range of prices that utilities across Alabama are charging. The black line shows the median. So if you follow the black line, half of the utilities are charging higher than that point for that consumption amount. So water, if you compare the blue bars, which is water, compared to the wastewater, which is in orange yellow, water rates are higher than wastewater. Water prices, water bills are higher than the wastewater bills, and half of the utilities are charging more than $32.80 per month at 5,000 gallons for water. On the wastewater side, that's $25.60. So a residential customer that's getting water, is probably paying somewhere around $50 to $60 per month, or more for about half the utilities that have both. The ranges are somewhere between $21.49 for all the utilities within that are charging 5,000 gallons. So you have some utilities charging $21. You have some utilities charging $49 for water, but the median again is about $32.80. How often do rates change in Alabama? We did the survey in between April and June of 2016. So we looked to see on the rate structures when were the rates first implemented. So does the rate structure say here are the rates and these rates are now effective as of January 2016, or do the rate structures say these are rates that are effective as of January 2013, and it's been 3 or 4 years since the last rate increase or last rate change. And you can see from the pie chart, about 2/3 of the rate structures that we have in the survey have changed rates within the last 2.5 years for the state of Alabama. So since 2014, between 2014 and 2016, 2/3 of the rate structures have raised rates, which is a sign that utilities in Alabama are very active as far as reviewing their rates annually and then adjusting the rates when needed. It could also be a sign that this was coming at the tail end of the economic downturn, and there are a lot of weather fluctuations and demand changes. So a lot of utilities may have seen some need to change rates in the past couple of years to accommodate for loss of revenue because of reductions in demand, or because people are just not buying as much. So it comes down to reductions in demand. So utilities in Alabama are very, very active in reviewing and updating the rates. But there's also on the other side of the spectrum, about 16% of the rate structures had not raised rates since 2011. So for 5 years or more, they have not updated the rates. How many of those 16% of rate structures are still adequate is a question that we try to answer in other kinds of analyses. So some of these 16% have not raised rates because they don't need it, because the rates that they charged 5 years ago are still very good for what they need right now and still cover all their costs. So there's no reason for them to raise rates. But there are also some utilities that have just been very reluctant to update their rates or to raise their rates, even though their costs have been going up. And they're just eating away into their reserve funds, or they're finding some other source of funding to cover the gap. But that is something that, if your utility is one of those utilities, you're actually, relative to the rest of the state, you're falling behind. And there's a lot of evidence that a lot of utilities in Alabama are not willing to stay in that kind of condition. They're willing to raise rates when they need to. All right, let me ask another poll question. This is a good stopping point. For this one, I would like to ask, let me see how I could, I apologize, I need to find the poll question from here. All right, so this question is about what do you consider to be true about your rates? And again, this is one of those where you can check all that apply. Are your rates enough to cover all of your operating and capital costs, whether that's debt service and cash expenses for pay-as-you-go sort of expenses for capital costs? If you don't check that, that means that it's enough to cover some of your costs, but not everything. So whether you check or you don't check actually means something here. So think about each one of these and then check all the ones that are true. Do the rates cover all of your operating and capital costs? Are your rates not sufficient to cover all of your costs? So this one actually, one or the other. More than 10% of your customers have trouble affording your rates. And there's a difference between they're late in paying their bills, but they can pay their bills, versus a true unaffordable. They truly struggle to pay the rates that you're charging them. Have not changed rates in more than 5 years, or the way that you structured your rates, you have a very strong price incentive for customers to be efficient in their water use or to conserve. So somehow you're charging high for high usage, and then if a person conserves and reduces their consumption, they'll see a strong decrease, or significant decrease in their bill. I'll give you another few seconds to answer this poll question. All right, and let me close it now. All right, so what we're seeing is that, wow, about 3/4 of you say that your rates are not sufficient to cover all of the costs, and some of you do say that it is sufficient. So this is not uncommon, and the reason why I put this slide up here is also, partly to show you that if you're in that condition, you're not alone. There are a lot of other utilities that have some issues with the rates. Nobody said that you have about 10% of your customers that have trouble affording rates, so affordability does not seem to be, it could be an issue for some customers, but not for that many customers for your community, which is a good sign. Some of you, about a third of you, have not changed rates in more than 5 years. Again, relative to the others in the state, you're one of the minority in this case. And again, if that's because you don't have to raise your rates, then that's great for you. And then only 13% say that your rates are structured to provide a strong incentive for water efficiency and conservation. I'm curious to hear why that is. So if you'd like to comment about that, please feel free to put it in the questions box. I know it's not a question, but you can submit a comment about why you think that is. Is it because you have ample supply and conservation is not a high priority for your utility, or water conservation is a priority, but you haven't gotten to the point where you're trying to use rates as a way to conserve? You're doing some other using some other techniques like mandatory restrictions and so on to reduce consumption. So thank you all for answering these questions. So question about rates being sufficient. We looked at the revenues and expenses for local governments that we had financial data for, and each dot here is a separate utility, and we looked at, so you can say anybody who's above this red line, the operating revenues that came in fiscal year 14 or fiscal year 15 was higher than the operating expenses. So that's where you want to be. You want to be above this red line. And overall, about 2/3 of the systems in Alabama had that. Their operating revenues exceeded their operating expenses, including depreciation, which is a very good, strong sign. Other utilities, a third of utilities are below that red line, and if they stay in that condition year after year, it means that they're using up their reserves, or they're basically not investing in capital infrastructure, and at some point there's going to be a huge capital bill or capital planning, capital plan that they have to pay for somehow because they have not been investing in that over time. For the utilities that are, they don't have enough revenues to meet their expenses, but their rates are low, there's, a slightly easy fix to that. You could raise your rates. But there are some utilities that have high rates, and they're still not able to recover their costs. So you can see the ones down here where they're charging some of the highest water rates in the state, but even that is not saving them, and the revenue that they're collecting are still too low relative to expenses. In that case, there are some ways to try to reduce costs. Think about regional type of projects instead of do expensive projects on your own. And there are some other techniques that can be used to try to alleviate some of these issues. If this is your condition, please feel free to contact me or anybody at EFC later on, and we'll be able to provide free direct assistance to your utility because we've gotten funding from ADEM and from EPA to do so. Are rates affordable? This is a bar chart that shows what the percentage of median household income is, and half of the utilities at 5,000 gallons a month, half of the utilities are charging more than 1.14% of the community's median household income for water alone. For wastewater, it's 0.88. So take those two things combined, most of the utilities are charging rates that are lower than, for water and wastewater combined, lower than about 2% per 2% MHI, which relative to a lot of other states is actually relatively low. These are lower rates than what we've seen in Georgia and North Carolina, and in other states too, but I keep mentioning North Carolina and Georgia because it's in the same region, and we have the same kind of climate and water use patterns. All right, let's go to poll number 3. This one is about comparing rates. So we're about to start demonstrating the dashboard itself, and just want to know if, when you're presenting, or whoever it is from your organization is presenting to the boards, the council, asking for an approval for rate increase, or you're just doing your rates review. When you're presenting, do you compare your rates to other utilities' rates? Does the board ask you to, or do you do it anyway? You show how much you're charging and then how much your neighbors are charging for the same volumes. So is this a very common practice in Alabama or not? I'll give you a few more seconds. Okay, looks like the answers are slowing down. So thank you. And looks like comparing rates is very, very common. In Alabama, 69% of you said that you do compare rates when you're presenting to the board, and the rest of you not sure or no, you don't. So comparing rates is a very common practice. It's common practice all over the country. Just wanted to get a feel for how it is in Alabama, and now I'll be presenting on ways that you can do these kind of comparisons a little bit better than the way it's been traditionally done. So the old way of comparing rates might be that you're busy, it's budget season, and you're reviewing your rates, and you're about to present to the boards, and now you're going to start calling up your neighboring systems, asking them how much do they charge their customers. It takes a lot of time. You call up the systems that or you call up systems that are nearby, and you produce a table or a graph like this, and you show this kind of graph to the board and say, look, we are, let's say we're the town of Cameron. This is from North Carolina. We're the town of Cameron. We're charging this much. We're charging some of the highest rates in our region, or something like that. This type of rate comparison is very, very common. We don't like that very much, partly because it does not really tell you very much. All it does is just rank your rates against other utilities, but there's nothing here that compares the different cost structures of the utilities or how well these utilities are managing their funds. What if you're a town of Cameron and you are charging high rates, but your enterprise fund is healthy, you have a capital improvement plan, you're paying for all your capital infrastructure, you happen to be in an area where your discharge limits are higher, there are just natural reasons for why the cost of treatment is high for your utility, but you're comparing to, let's say, a town of 4 Oaks, which has some of the lowest rates, and your rates look high, which is not a good thing, but the city of 4 Oaks, which is not true, I'm just giving this as an example, hypothetical example. What if 4 Oaks does not have a good enterprise fund? They've been subsidizing their water system through the general funds. They have not raised rates in 10 years. They're not willing to raise rates because they like being called, one of the utilities with the lowest rates. So these are kinds of comparisons that you cannot do with a bar chart like this. So we're proposing to use a dashboard instead, which compares different metrics all at once. So instead of saying, I just want to see how my rates compare, I want to see how my rates compare, how my enterprise fund is doing, if my rates are affordable, if our rates are sending a conservation signal, how's our enterprise funds doing as far as capital, paying for capital as well as operating expenses. I want to see all of that, but I don't want to show the board 10 different graphs and ask them to try to think about all these graphs at the same time. I want to have something that's interactive, that's visual, that in one screenshot gives you that kind of complete picture. So that's the whole point of the rates dashboard. And I'll be pulling that up in a second. It's available on our website. It's free. It has all these rates data. Everything I mentioned before, all that data is crammed into that dashboard, as well as all the supplemental data. Every single socioeconomic data point for all the utilities, all the SIDWIS data, everything's in there that helps you do these comparisons. It's free, it's open to the public. You can compare your rates, you can assess financial performance, evaluate affordability and conservation price signal. You can compare your rates to other utilities, and you can do that smartly. You can compare against all utilities in the state, or you can compare to utilities that are similar to you in size and rate structure, in location, in demographics, the type of water source, and the financials. So it filters automatically all the utilities in the state, all the 448 utilities in the state, and it finds the ones that are similar to you based on any one of these characteristics, and it does the comparisons for you automatically. So you don't have to go through the effort of calling 450 utilities and getting the rate structures and try to figure out which ones you need to be comparing to. That's all done for you. And again, thanks to ADEM for funding this effort. We asked in the registration whether or not you're familiar with the dashboards, and this is a screenshot of the dashboard right now. About 2/3 of you said that you are not familiar with the dashboard, and a third of you are. So I will go over the dashboard in a little bit of detail to kind of explain how each of these dials work and how to use the tool. While I am doing that, I'm going to ask everybody right now to volunteer. If you'd like us to pull up your utility as a demonstration during this webinar and show you how your metrics match up, how your rates compare, how you're doing on enterprise fund and so forth, please put it in the question box. Let me know the name of your utility. And I won't have time to go through everybody. I might be able to pull up 1 or 2 examples only. But I'll start off by showing just a hypothetical example utility, and then I'll pull up 1 or 2 of you who volunteer and go over some of those numbers. And then for the other utilities, I'll be happy to schedule some time to do this over the phone if you'd like to review your rates. Of course, you can also just do it on your own. We are recording this webinar, so you can always come back and see how these dials work and what do they mean. To find the dashboards, the easiest way is just to do a Google search. Just type in Alabama Water Rates Dashboard, EFC, and it should pop up early on. Or you can go to our webpage again and just search for Alabama Rates Dashboard from there. This PowerPoint slide has a direct link, so if you download the PowerPoint slide later on, you can just click on that direct link. All right, so let me demonstrate the dashboard. So from our website, this is the resource page that I mentioned earlier. That has information about the rate survey, that has the dashboard, the reports and the tables, and also it has other information, recordings of webinars. This webinar will be added to this list. If you go to the left, you'll see the tools, the publications. Let's click on the rates dashboard, and it explains what the dashboard is. But if you just want to launch it, just click on that click to run tool in browser. And give it a second, it pops up. Let me scroll so you can see the whole screen. Hopefully everybody can see the full, yeah, I think that's good. So the dashboard pops up, and it's sort of alphabetically, so Abville shows up as the first utility. I'm going to go to an example utility instead. So this list here, that's where you start. You click on this drop down and start typing in the name of your utility. So Birmingham, and just by starting to type it, it will filter out and it will show you all the utilities that have what you're typing in. You can just select that utility. So if I want Birmingham, I would click on that, and Birmingham's data is loaded. Or you could just kind of scroll through and pick any one of the utilities, and they are sorted alphabetically. But for now, I'm just going to demonstrate an example utility, which is hypothetical. None of this information is true, but we use it for training purposes. And then I will show you one or two other examples. So we have different tabs: rates comparison, financial benchmarks, characteristics, and links. Let's focus on the rates comparison one, which is where we are right now. What you see, hopefully, 4 different dials. You see a lot of greens, yellows, and reds. I hope everybody can intuitively know that green is probably a good thing, red is probably not so good, and yellow is somewhere in between. And that's part of the design of the dashboard, to give a very quick, intuitive look at this. I mean, looking at these numbers, this is in green, this is in yellow, this is in yellow, this is in green. So overall, I'm getting the sense that this example utility has some things that are good for it and some things that are in the caution area, but nothing that's really bad. Nothing stands out as terrible. If it was more of this type of utility, where there's a lot more yellows and a very significant red, my first gut reaction is there's something going on that's not very good here. And that's true, and that's part of the storytelling of this dashboard. Let's go back to the example utility. You can select whether you want to look at your water bill, your sewer bill, wastewater, or you can do water, wastewater combined. Let's pick that. And at what consumption point? So it starts off at 5,000 gallons a month. You can look at the bill that you charge anywhere from 0 gallons all the way up to 15,000 gallons in 500 gallon increments. So if you know what your average consumption is, let's say it's 4,500. If your average consumption is 4,500, then slide that slider to 4,500 gallons. And we have the cubic feet here for those who do cubic feet, and you can kind of try to find something close to what you want. For this example utility, they're charging $55.50 for 4,500 gallons for water and wastewater combined. How does this number compare? Here's the first dial. So that $55.50 is what they're charging for all of this. It's in this middle green area. Now this dial, actually both of these dials, are linked to this map that you see here. By selecting different comparisons, you could, the graph will change, and the dots that you see are coloring all the stuff that's going around the dial. So the middle green area is the middle 50% of all the bills that are being charged by all these blue dots. Each blue dot is a different utility. So the fact that this utility is charging $55.50 and it's in the middle of this green area means that this utility is charging somewhere right in the middle of what the middle 50% is. So they're close to that median. If they're charging anywhere in that bottom yellow area, there's a small yellow area here, that's the lowest 10% of all of these utilities charges. This high yellow area is the highest 10% of all the utilities. So a utility that's charging in this yellow area would see that they're charging more than 90% of all the dots that they see on this map. Or if you're in this yellow area, then you're charging less than 90% of all the utilities in this map. For all this information, you can always click on any of these question marks, and it explains in as plain English as we can possibly put financial metrics. It will explain all this information as well as some links to other tools and information. So this utility is charging $55.50. They're in the middle. It looks fine. This dial down here is looking at the cost recovery. So based on the data that we have collected from their financial metrics for this hypothetical utility in fiscal year 2016, that's the year up here, their operating ratio, which is calculated as operating revenues divided by operating expenses, their operating ratio is above 1.0, which is what you want it to be if you want more revenues and expenses. Anywhere below 1 is a bad, not bad, but more operating expenses than operating revenues, and that means that you're eating into your reserves. We're showing a little bit of a yellow area here because if you're trying to cover, this just looks at operating expenses. If you're trying to cover capital expenses going forward, you want to be generating more revenues than your operating expenses. You want to be generating enough that you can pay for not just your current O&M expenses, but also your debt service, as well as future capital expenses that you're going to be paying as pay-go. So in that case, we show a small yellow area here and kind of incentivize or to remind utilities that they should be aiming for higher than 1.0, just purely 1.0. But that where the yellow and green areas cross here is something that's a little bit subjective, and your utility might have a different threshold for what you should be aiming for. And then this dial here shows the affordability. So for that $55.50, if a household that has the median income for your community, so you take all the households in your community, you line them up based on their income, and you take the middle households, so half of the households in your community are making less than this one particular household. And you say, all right, well, if that household buys 4,500 gallons of water and wastewater a month for 12 months, they're spending 12 times this $55.50. How much of their income is going to be going towards paying those bills? And the answer is 1.55%. So they're spending 1.5% of their total annual income on annual water and wastewater bills. That's a very common affordability metric. There are some issues with the percent MHI, and if you're interested, you can always click on this question mark and then read this blog post about it. But there are some problems with that indicator. It is still the most commonly used affordability metric. But what's affordable? Is 1.55% affordable for water and wastewater combined? Or is that unaffordable? Does that sound high or low to you? There is not really a single number or a single threshold that's very that everybody would agree on. There are some suggestions here and there, but most of those suggestions are related to eligibility for low interest loans and for grants. But as far as EPA or anybody else saying all utilities should never charge more than 3% of MHI, no one's doing that. That is up to you and to your board, your council, to decide what exactly is affordable or not affordable. So we are showing green, yellow, and red here, but these things are completely subjective. The reason why we're showing them, even though it crosses at 2% for water and wastewater combined, does not mean that we're saying affordable rates is anywhere less than 2%, unaffordable rates is anything above 3%. That's not necessarily true. All we're trying to show here is that lower percent MHI is more affordable than higher percent MHI. So it's supposed to kind of show you this kind of trend. The lower you are, the better. The higher you are, the worse off you are. And this conservation signal is showing you how much you're charging per 1,000 gallons above 10,000 gallons. So that's usually enough for a household to be watering. It's a summertime consumption. They're watering the lawns. They're using the water indoors. So there's a lot of, they already have some discretionary use for the next 1,000 gallons, which is probably going to be used for more discretionary use. How much are you charging them? How much extra are you charging them for that extra 1,000 gallons? So for this utility, they're charging $5 for water and wastewater for the next 1,000 gallons above 10,000, which is relatively low. And the colors here that you see, 4 different colors, are based on quartiles. So they're in the bottom 25% of all these utilities. This green area here is the top 25% of all of them. Let me pull up one of the examples right now. Madison Utilities, thank you for volunteering. All right, so Madison Utilities, so be careful not to click on the wrong one. So here's Madison Utilities, and let's stick to the water and wastewater combined. I'm not sure what your average consumption is, but let's stick to the 45, or let's go to 5,000 gallons. So here's 5,000 gallons. In April 2016 rates, you are charging $45.80 for water and wastewater combined. Relative to all these other utilities, 206 utilities have water and wastewater. That's relatively low. You're not in the bottom 10%, but you are in the bottom 25%. So this light green area here also shows the bottom 25%. So you're in the bottom quartile of all the rates that were being charged on this map. You can compare yourself to not just all utilities, but let's say utilities of the same size, so similar number of accounts. So automatically it's filtering and showing you there's only about 15 utilities that have water and wastewater that have between 10,000 and 25,000 accounts. If I just look at water, it has a few more utilities because there's quite a few utilities in Alabama that have water but not wastewater. And relative to the similar sized utilities, your water rates are low. They're in the lowest 10%. On the water and wastewater combined, also you're in the lowest 10%. So relative to similar sized utilities, you have low rates. But are these low rates too low? Looking at the cost recovery, you did great in fiscal year 2014. Your operating revenues were higher than your operating expenses by 53%, which is great. If you want to find out the details, if you click on that question mark, we list what was listed in your audited statements. $14 million for operating revenues, $9 million for operating expenses. So you had a little bit of a surplus, which will hopefully go towards paying for capital projects. On the affordability side, that 4580, which are low rates, is also relatively low compared to your community's income. If you click on that question mark, we list what the median household income for your community is. And I think we might list what your community is in a different tab. I'll show you where you can find that. But we show that your community is serving an area that has $92,000 or nearly $93,000 is the median household income, which is relatively high. If you click on the characteristics tab, we show you what we've picked as, where is that? Over here. What we are showing as your service area. And for Madison Utilities, it was Madison City, and Madison City's median household income in 2014 median household income was about $92,000 or $93,000. So overall impression is this is fantastic. I mean, you have low rates, but the rates are enough to cover all of your expenses and more, and your affordability metrics are looking good. So, that is a good sign. And on the conservation side, you could do a little bit, if you are trying to encourage conservation, you could be pricing your rates a little bit differently to encourage a little bit more because you're in the bottom 50% of these utilities. Let's change that to go back to all utilities. Even then, that $6.96 per 1,000 gallons is a little low relative to all these other utilities. We have financial benchmark tab that has 4 different financial benchmarks. This fourth one, the cost recovery operating ratio dial, is the same one as the one we were just talking about. So I'm going to skip that. But these other 3 have slightly different metrics. This one is it looks like the same thing, operating revenues by operating expenditures. What we did here is we just excluded depreciation from the operating expenses. So if you do that, that's purely just O&M expenses. So your operating revenues were 3 times your day-to-day operations and maintenance expenses with nothing set aside for capital projects, nothing set aside for debt service. It's just purely just day-to-day operations, which is really high and it's fantastic. The debt service coverage ratio is how much you, after paying your O&M expenses, and then how much do you have left, how much operating margin do you have left to pay for your principal and interest payments on your debt? And the answer is twice as much. So that net revenue that you have after paying for O&M was enough to pay for your debt service twice, which is good. You want that to be above 1. Usually the bond covenants or the funders will tell you that the debt service coverage ratio needs to be at least 1.2 or 1.25 or something like that because they want a little bit of a buffer, a little bit of security for those lean years going forward. So you need to always be aiming for above 1.2 or above 1.25. And for Madison in fiscal year 2014, they definitely met that. And measures of liquidity, days cash on hand, is a metric that shows, if you collect absolutely no more revenue, how much do you have in unrestricted cash in your account, in your enterprise funds right now as of the end of fiscal year 14, and how many days of O&M expenses could that pay for? And in this case, 536 days. So if you had, if you stopped collecting rates all of a sudden, you had enough unrestricted cash in your account at the end of fiscal year 14 to have paid for another 536 days of just O&M, but nothing else, no capital costs or debt service. So that's how you can read this. Everything here looks great. Let me pull up another. Geneva has asked for, this will be a quick one. I'm not going to go into as much detail, but I just want to give you like the overall look. So water and wastewater for Geneva. Again, low rates relative to all these other utilities. Let's change that. Let's look at, within my watersheds. So in your watershed, also in the lowest 10%, based on utilities in congressional districts or within 50 miles radius. So you have different ways to slice this map up. No matter how we're doing it, it looks like even within your region, or within the system size, based on location, system size, or even customer income level, every way that we look at this, your rates in April 2016 were low. They're in the bottom 10% of similar utilities, which might be good. But then we look at the cost recovery dial, and in fiscal year 14, your operating expenses exceeded your operating revenues. So you had more revenue. You had $1.1 million in expenses, which includes depreciation, as opposed to $970,000 operating revenues. I'm curious to see if you had enough to pay for O&M, and the answer is yes. So you had enough to pay for your day-to-day. You basically balanced your budgets, but not enough to pay for that depreciation or to basically save some money aside for future capital. And also, if you look at the debt service coverage ratio, you did not have enough in fiscal year 14 to cover O&M expenses and also debt service. So you must have, dipped into the reserve fund to kind of pay off the difference there. But that's usually, you can't sustain this year after year. This would have to raise. Well, in this case, what happens if you raise rates? You could use the slider down here to look at rate increases. So let's say you raise your rates by 15%. You can see that the rates have gone up. So there's a little light area here that goes up. The cost recovery dial goes up a little closer to 9 to 1. Thinking I have to go a little bit higher than that. Let's say you need about 20 to 21% last year to go above 1.0 for this cost recovery dial, which would have raised your rate to $45 a month instead of what it was. And on the affordability side, again, it's going to go up. It goes up from what was about 1.5 to nearly 1.86. So it becomes slightly less affordable by having a 20% rate increase, but it would have improved the financial metric numbers quite a bit. So that's the demonstration of the dashboard. Again, the dashboard is up and it's available for anybody to use. We're running out of time, so let me see if there are any quick questions for me to answer. We did one question from the registration, and the question was, is it reasonable to increase rates because of known near future expenses and capital improvement costs? And the answer is yes, absolutely, and you're encouraged to do that. You should be looking at every year, you should be looking at not just what you're projecting for your operations and maintenance, but also what your next year's capital budget is going to be, and also future years, and have a plan to spread out your rate increases over time, slowly over time, to generate all the revenues that you need so they can have the money when you need it to pay for the capital, as opposed to just waiting, and then have a 50% or a 30% increase in 1 year to pay for capital expenses. So it is absolutely reasonable, and it is recommended that you do that. Slow rate increases over time, as opposed to not raising rates and then just having a significant rate increase later on. I'll mention that we have another webinar on Tuesday at the same time, 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock Central Time. And that one's going to be focused on designing appropriate rate structures for water and wastewater utilities in Alabama. So looking at uniform rates or block rates and base charges versus volumetric. What do you need to do if you're trying to encourage conservation, if you're trying to encourage affordability? How can you structure your rates to generate the same amount of revenue, but to help address some of those objectives of the system? So that's available, and it should have gone out in the same email that you registered for this webinar. There's a link to that webinar too, so we recommend that you sign up for that. You can also feel free to sign up to the Environmental Finance blog. We write a blog about once a week or so, maybe once every 2 weeks sometimes, And we talk about a lot of things that are relevant to water utility management. We've had blogs about declining demands, about increasing rates, about financial performance metrics, debts, how you communicate with the board. So there's a lot of hands-on tips, basically, and a lot of research that we do that we distill down to these blog posts to kind of inform utilities about what's going on in their state or across the country. So I'll pull up a poll real quick to see if anybody wants to sign up. I'll mention also that we can work with small water systems serving fewer than 10,000 customers, or 10,000 people, sorry, and we can provide free indirect assistance, so basically free consulting, basically. And we work with utilities hand in hand to do a review of rates, to look at a dashboard, to see how they compare, to talk about strategies to achieve their financial goals at the utility. And that's we work through conference calls, and we do analysis and kind of share the results. So let me apologize, I know that we're going slightly over, but I wanted to see if anybody wants to sign up for the blog, and you can just yes or no. I'll just give you 5 seconds to fill this one in. But the blog is free, and you'll get, again, it's just once a week or once every 2 weeks, so not very many. All right, thank you. And finally, if you are a small water system and want to have us communicate, want to schedule a time for us to call you and schedule a time to talk about how we can help you with rates and finance, put a yes here, and we will follow up and call you. All right, thank you. All right, and so that's the end of the webinar. So thank you everybody for your attention, and again, thanks to ADEM for funding the rate survey and the dashboards. If you guys have any questions using the dashboards or anything that's related to rates and finance or the upcoming webinar, please feel free to call me or to email me, and I'm happy to work with you directly. Otherwise, thank you very much.